Hey guys, I'm actually editing this video that you're watching right now in my bedroom. I just want to let you know what's going on. Today we're doing the fuel system for the 57 Chevrolet. We're doing the fuel tank, we're modifying the floor. None of this is necessary, but it's really necessary what we're doing with what the customer supplied and the parts that he wants to use. So I'm going to go ahead and do what he needs us to do. And we're going to be modifying a sending unit, integrating a fuel pump, using the Corvette filter regulator assembly, which works on a lot of builds, but some it doesn't regulate efficiently. We'll see what happens with this one. We're going to try to run it. I want to let you guys know I'd like to apologize for the infrequency of posting videos. I've been super busy with my shop. I do own a hot rod performance shop. That's how I make my bacon, not through YouTube. So I've been focusing on that and getting customer cars back to them within the promised deadlines. However, we are further ahead of the build that you're going to see here today. We're actually almost completed the build, and I do have all that content recorded. I just have to get it out, edit it, voice it over, and put it on YouTube for you guys to see. But I do appreciate you guys being patient with me and allowing me to share this educational content with you. So without getting too much further into that, let's get into today's video, you guys. Okay, so here's the original fuel tank. You can see the original sending unit that was fed into the original fuel system. This is all going to get removed in order to put in that new stainless tank the customers provided, and the new tank is going to actually bolt to the floor of the trunk pan. However, if you see this rail over here by this exhaust, we need the new tank to fit between this rail over here and this rail on the other side of this spare tire well. Now, what that's going to entail is us actually cutting out the spare tire well. But first, we're going to have to get this tank drained and get it ripped out of here so we can go ahead and put the new stuff in there. So I'm going to take my wrench and get everything to start draining, and thankfully there wasn't a whole bunch of fuel in here. With the old tank down, you guys can see all these straps and hardware. You can go ahead and pull this old tank out of the way and remove these straps and hardware because we're not going to be needing them for what we're doing. You can see this old filler nut. We're going to go ahead and replace that too because God knows what's inside of there. So here's our spare tire well. Now what we're going to do is end up getting the welds broken on here because the frame rail sits over on the other side. So what we're going to do is you see that there's this seam sealer here. That's got to get out of here, which thankfully won't be too hard of a job. Now, what I'm going to end up using today is my screwdriver. Just the normal flathead will do this just fine since this is older seam sealer. And you're just going to kind of work around the whole diameter of your wheel well piece, or your spare tire well, I should say, just to get that out of there. Now I'm using my screwdriver here to kind of lift up on an edge to show you this first method I'm going to use. But I'm trying to get a gap so I can get my tool under it so I can start working. Now here I have a pry bar. Usually you use a beveled panel splitter to pop through welds, but I'm just using this right now to show you guys that this can be done. But the other method that most people are used to are these things right here, which are spot weld drill bits, which are pretty common in the body and collision world, and they do exactly what the name entails. They drill through spot welds. You kind of want to get used to using these, that way you don't drill through the bottom panel that's underneath the top panel. But if you do, you can always go ahead and just fill that back up with weld. What I'm going to do is just drill these guys out here and continue going along to the back. I'm also going to have to drill out the spot weld using this bit on this tire hold down, as you see right here. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. So I have this off of here. Didn't take too long to get off. I did end up drilling through, but that should be okay. This side I busted off with the pry bar. You want to use a panel splitter because it'll do a lot better of a job and won't beat up the panels so badly. But now that that's done, I just kind of did each side, one with the drill bit, one with the pry bar, just to show it's possible, but it lifts right out. And you can see these were busted apart using my pry bar. Again, panel splitter is the way to go, and this side was drilled out. So the next thing we're going to do is kind of hammer down our rough spots or get those flat, and get everything kind of prepped up. But we didn't do too bad using both methods. But you can see it's a little rough over here where I kind of had to pry some of these welds that I didn't drill evenly through. So again, take your time while you're doing it, and you shouldn't really need to do too much more. So here we have our spare tire well removed. I'm going to end up using a piece of cardboard to actually trace this out, but for now I'm going to get it up out the way and go get the cardboard stuff I need and the metal I need to make this panel that's going to go in here. So here's my 16 gauge piece of sheet steel, and here's my template that I made. We're going to end up putting a slight curve in this too once we have it cut out, but this is everything we need. Now here I'm just kind of taking my time with my cutting tool, just making sure that I'm getting all the right curves that I need without actually taking off too much metal. But like I said, if you tape the template in place, you shouldn't have too much of an issue with that. It should all kind of come together for you. Just take your time and make sure to go slow with it, guys. But the tool does all the work for you, and it's kind of fun actually if you just sit there and vibe with everything that you're doing. It'll be done before you know it. You also want to make sure to take your grinder and grind smooth any of the sharp sides or any ridges or any burrs that might be on this. That way your panel sits flat. So here's the panel we got. As you see, I had to contour the back slightly to go with the curvature of the trunk floor pan. And the next thing we're going to have to do is drill our holes. You can do this with a hand drill or a drill press. So here are our holes. This panel is also sold pre-made, by the way, guys, but I didn't do that. And here we have them actually welded in. A good weld-through primer underneath actually helps a lot. And what we're going to end up doing is getting this thing seated in here and taped off, because what I'm going to do is first seam seal it and then epoxy it on top and bottom. That way this portion is kind of sealed in, and when the car goes off to get body work done and all the inside sprayed and lined, they can take care of it from there. Now on to the fuel system. This is a Corvette, or like C5 Corvette regulator. It's a filter regulator assembly. These are pretty common in the LS swap world. I have a video on these and actually setting up a pretty basic fuel system, but we're going to be running this from a Walbro 255 fuel pump from the fuel tank. But before we get to that and actually hook this all up, this one came from Speedway with 6AN fittings on it, so we're going to run a 6AN system. But first we actually have to get the pump sat inside the fuel tank, which it wasn't designed for. But here's our new tank that we're going to be using. It's actually not designed as a fuel injection tank, but it doesn't really matter. Now, something I don't really understand about this stainless tank is whoever designed it, I don't believe it's for a 57 Chevrolet or any Tri-5 car, because this just doesn't add up. And this, where the positioning would be, it's way deeper than the actual fuel tank. The contour doesn't follow the fuel tank, and no matter which way I happen to position it, it's just not going to sit down. If I spin this thing 360, it wouldn't sit down. And I need it to face forward, so I had to do some modifying of this sending unit. So what we're actually going to be doing here is cutting out segments of this and shortening it up using fuel-proof fuel injection hose. And what I'm going to be able to do with that is turn portions of the sending unit in the directions I need to follow the contour bottom of the fuel tank. So just by cutting out certain sections, I'm able to actually redirect these parts in different areas, allowing the sending unit float to not bottom out, and also being able to integrate the Walbro 255 fuel pump into here, all by just removing smaller sections of this and kind of manipulating it around to the angles I need. Now, as you can see here, I have this top part of the neck with the float kind of angled, and then now I have the pump attached. I'm not going to go into too many details because this is kind of like a one-off. thing that I had to do for this system, but it's just to give you an idea of what had to be done. This longer piece of tubing allows this pump to actually sit deep enough and far back enough into the fuel tank to pick up fuel from its lowest point. And I'm just going to go ahead and go get everything kind of positioned and wired up past this point now. But this is just to give you an idea of the things you can do to turn a non-fuel injection sending unit into a electronically powered unit. Now you'll see here I kind of have everything fitting in there. The holes on the tank don't necessarily align perfectly, so I'm going to see what I could do to remedy that. Maybe widen out some of the holes on the top. The threads are just barely even making it on some of these holes, but this was a tank that was built in China, as the inspection sticker says, so I'm just going to go ahead and see what I can do to get this figured out. But in the meantime, I still have to take this sending unit fuel pump assembly out of here and actually wire it up and feed the wiring through this hole that you see on the top of the sending unit. It's just so frustrating to see that after all this money this customer put out, that it still doesn't line up. But you know, it was inspected by Zhu Weidong, so I'm sure he did the best. Here's my wiring that I ran from the Walbro 255. I have it going up along the contour of the sending unit and up to the top. Now you guys can use JB Weld, which is fuel proof, or maybe even a gray RTV to kind of seal up this hole to keep the fuel from coming out of it. But this is the whole unit that I have assembled right now with the sock, the fuel pump, the hose. You can see it goes over to the level sending unit, and then the wires are just going to come out the top, and I'm going to put those into the system. This isn't something that I would recommend, guys, because as you see, some of these holes don't line up. Maybe if I widen them out a hair, not too much, I can get it to line up, but I'm probably going to use some RTV to kind of seal it up a little bit just to guarantee there's no leaks. But this is pretty much it. Now I do need this to face forward like that. It's not going to seem like it's going to work, so I'm going to probably have to put it at a slight angle. But again, this tank isn't used, or I should say designed, for fuel injection. In my opinion, not even a 56, 57 Chevrolet. None of the Tri-5 cars, because this just doesn't add up on how it's supposed to be mounted to the floor, nor the positioning of the sending unit, or the angle of the bottom of the tank. You can do the exact same thing using a factory style tank, and just kind of doing some modifications to the sending unit fuel pump assembly like you see me doing here, and achieve the same thing with literally a quarter of the headache of having to do the cutting of the floorboard and all that stuff. It's a little bit unnecessary, but the customer wants to use this tank, and this is what we're going to end up doing. So I guess I'm going to go ahead and get my screws together and get this top hole sealed up with a little bit of a JB Weld to make sure no fuel comes through. And then we'll go on to kind of seeing what happens with the vent hole they have at the top of this thing. Because running a vent hole in this will be pretty important, since it'll be a fuel injected system. And I just wanted to be able not to have to overpressurize this tank and cause it to, I don't know, do whatever it is. But you see here, this thing's too long, so that's going to have to be cut. So these aren't PTFE lines like I prefer to use. These are AN lines that are just rubber covered with braided steel. These are going to be ran. We need three, one coming from the tank to the back of the regulator, one running from the regulator to the front of the engine's fuel rail system, and then one running as the return from the regulator, and we're going to run that return into the filler neck. Now, I'm just sitting in my truck eating lunch, putting these together. I do have the jig to put in the vise to tighten these things up and make them snug, but I'm just going to use my adjustable wrench covered with tape on one end and use my aluminum wrench here, just get it all tightened up while I eat my lunch, and get those lines made up so we can get the fuel system kind of, mocked up or installed, if you will. But it's going to go together pretty easy. So you guys, whatever lines you use, just make sure you take your time and get a good seating of the fitting inside of that line. Okay, guys, so I have the fuel line ran up here to the motor, kind of zip tied in place to hold it. I'm about to put the fitting on the fuel rail to actually attach the 6A end fitting, but I just have it ran behind the engine away from any exhaust or heat sources that could damage it, and along the outside of the driver frame rail. It's going to be secured in a moment using some P-clips to hold it nice and tight, but I have it on the outside of the rail, and it runs back, and then right before the wheel and wheel well, it transitions over the frame to the inside. of the frame rail, and that's just to avoid any damage from road debris or blowout or anything like that that could possibly happen. Here you'll see I have everything plumbed and I have it grounded out to the frame, the pump that is, and I don't have any of the other parts of the wiring done right now, so I'm just going to use my power probe and I'm going to put 12 volts to the pump to actually make sure it works. And everything seems to be working well. So now I have to do the rest of the wiring and actually wire this into the fuel pump relay that comes from the engine wiring harness. So we'll get to that in a little bit.